Hello everybody, and once again I'm Justin Pontarelli, and you're still probably wondering, where are those interstellar pilot videos? To be fair, I'm having a hard time figuring out an ending, so if you want to give me any ideas on how to end the series, which in my opinion means ending the character of Don Carnage, okay, let me know in the comments down below, please, how you would go about doing that in a acceptable way. This is not a Living Sword Ministries video. This is something different. I've always wanted this channel to be about stuff that I like, but yes, it was initially created to be about sharing my beliefs. But today, we'll be doing something different. Today it's going to be me, the narrator, Justin Pontarelli, reads Isaac Asimov's Nightfall from this book. And I think the screen reverses the text, so I'll just read it for you. It's a Science Fiction Hall of Fame. This little paperback came from ADT, the little call center I was working at, really a large call center, had a little reading library. So basically you take any book you like, you drop it off if you don't want it anymore, and people can read it in between calls or on break, and then the idea is you put it back at the end of your shift. Well, one day, I knew I was walking away from ADT, pretty much for good, and because of my disability, and I was out of time off, out of sick leave, and there was nothing left that HR could do for me. So I had read this book one time, or most of it, a lot of the stories out of it. I'm like, this is pretty cool stuff. I've always loved science fiction, space travel, always a big Star Trek fan, so I'm like, you know what? I took it. Technically, no one wanted it. That's why it's at ADT, right? That's why it's in the reading library. So, here we are. Justin Pontarelli reads Nightfall by Isaac Asimov. I do apologize if I butcher the name. So yeah, something very different today. It's about a 40-page thing, so I don't even know if I'll make it through the whole thing. So it's just going to be my ugly face the whole time. So if you don't want to see my ugly face, close your eyes and listen to my retarded voice. Okay, here it goes. Nightfall. If the stars should appear one night in 1,000 years, how would men believe and adore and preserve for many generations the remembrance of the city of God? Emerson. I didn't know it started with that quote. You'll know it's me just talking when I look at the camera. When I'm reading, my face will be like that. And my eyes will too. Anton, 77, director of Sero University, thrust out a belligerent lower lip and glared at the young newspaperman in a hot fury. Sorry. Guys, I'm out of practice. I used to read all the time, like when I was a kid, but now it's like I'm on YouTube all the time. It's true what they say. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. Thermon 762 took that fury in his stride in his earlier days, when his now widely syndicated column was only a mad idea in a cub reporter's mind. He had specialized in impossible interviews. It had cost him bruises, black eyes, and broken noses, but it had given him an ample supply of coolness and self-confidence. So he lowered the outthrust hand that had been so pointedly ignored and calmly waited for the aged director to get over the worst. Astronomers were queer ducks, anyway, And if Anton's actions of the last 2 months meant anything, this same Anton was the queer, duckiest of the lot. Anton 77 found his voice, and though it trembled with restrained emotion, the careful, somewhat pedantic phraseology for which the famous astronomer was noted did not abandon him. "Sir," he said, you display an infernal gall in coming to me with the impudent proposition of yours." The husky telephotographer of the observatory, Ben 25, thrust a tongue's tip across dry lips and interposed nervously, "Now, sir, after all," as we turn the page. So this will be the annoying part. How do you keep the camera steady while you have to drop it to your knee and turn the page? I don't know. And real quickly, as you look at my rats that I used to own, check this out. An old little souvenir from an old trip to the Philippines. Another story altogether, not for today. Okay. The director turned to him and lifted a white eyebrow. "Do not interfere, Benet. I will credit you with good intentions in bringing this man here, but I will tolerate no insubordination now." Theremin decided it was time to take a part. "Director Anton, if you will let me finish what I started saying, I don't believe, young man," retorted Anton, "that anything you could say now would count much as compared with your daily columns of these last 2 months. You have led a vast..." Oopsie. No effect, please. Sorry. I'm trying to just wave my hand across, my finger across the screen to keep the picture stable. Maybe it won't flick over. Guess not. We'll just start with, "I don't believe, young man." "I don't believe, young man," retorted Anton, "that anything you could say now would count much as compared with your daily columns of these last 2 months. You have led a vast newspaper campaign against the efforts of myself and my colleagues to organize the world against the menace which is now too late to avert. You have done your best with your highly personal attacks on me to make the staff of this observatory objects of ridicule." The director lifted the copy of the Cerro City Chronicle on the table and shook it at Theremin furiously. There you go, some choreography? I don't know. Okay. There you go. So anyway, back to the book. "Even a person of your well-known impudence should have hesitated before coming to me with a request that he be allowed to cover today's events for his paper. Of all newsmen, you..." Anton dashed the newspaper to the floor, strode to the window, and clasped his arms behind his back. Guys, I gotta itch my eyes, stuff, things. Here, sorry. As I shed some skin, because, it's dry and blah, blah, blah. Sorry. Back to the book, if I can find my place. Anton dashed the newspaper to the floor, strode to the window, and clasped his arms behind his back. That's what you don't want to happen. See? "You may leave," he snapped over his shoulder. He stared moodily out at the skyline, where Gamma, the brightest of the planet's 6 suns, was setting. It had already faded and yellowed into the horizon's mists, and Anton knew he would never see it again as a sane man. He whirled. No, wait. Come here." He gestured peremptorily. I'll give you your story. The newsman had made no motion to leave, and now he approached the old man slowly. Anton gestured outward. Of the 6 suns, only Beta is left in the sky. Do you see it? The question was rather unnecessary. Beta was almost at zenith, its ruddy light flooding the landscape to an unusual orange. As the brilliant rays of setting gamma died, Beta was at aphelion. Because I probably butcher some of these words, don't I? It was small, smaller than Theramon had ever seen it before, and for the moment, it was undisputed ruler of Lagash's sky. Lagash's own sun, Alpha, the one about which it revolved, was at the antipodes, as were the 2 distant companion pairs. The red dwarf Beta, Alpha's immediate companion, was gone, grimly alone. Anton's upturned face flushed readily in the sunlight. In just under 4 hours, he said, civilization, as we know it, comes to an end. Dun, dun, dun! There we are. It will do so, because as you see, Beta is the only sun in the sky, he said grimly. Print that. There will be no one to read it. But if it turns out that 4 hours pass, and another 4, nothing happens, asked Theramon softly. Oh, I didn't do it softly, did I? I'm sorry. Let's try that again. Let's softly this time. But if it turns out that 4 hours pass, and another 4, and nothing happens? Asked Theramon softly. Don't let that worry you. Enough will happen. Granted, and still if nothing happens. For a second time, Benet 25 spoke. Sir, I think you ought to listen to him, Theramon said. Put it to a vote, Director Anton. There was a stir among the remaining 5 members of the observatory staff, who till now had maintained an attitude of wary neutrality. That, Anton stated flatly, is not necessary. He drew out his pocket watch. Since your good friend, Benet, insists so urgently, I'll give you 5 minutes. Talk away. I'm going to pause here just to simply say, my hand is killing me. And isn't it so annoying you read a book and it's like, man, on TV and movies, every character has its own voice and stuff. But when I read a book, all the characters sound the same. It's just so annoying. Okay, hold on. Let me readjust my hand and give it a little shake. I'm going to switch hands here. So we're going to switch sides. And as I get my hand comfortable. So we're going to switch hands. We switched hands, and now you're going to see me looking this way instead. Sorry, gas. 1 second. As always, what you see and hear is what you get, or more specifically, it's what I did. No editing here. I'm lazy, I don't do it, if I can help it. Talk away. Good. Now just what difference would it make if you allowed me to take down an eyewitness account of what's to come? If your prediction comes true, my presence won't hurt, for in that case my column would never be written. On the other hand, if nothing comes of it, you will just have to expect ridicule, or worse, it would be wise to leave that ridicule to friendly hands. Anton snorted. Do you mean yours, when you speak of friendly hands? Certainly. Theramon sat down and crossed his legs. My columns may have been a little rough at times, but I gave you people the benefit of the doubt every time. After all, this is not the century to preach the end of the world is at hand to Lagash. You have to understand that people don't believe the Book of Revelations anymore. And it annoys them to have scientists turn about face and tell us the cultists are right after all. Sounds like a similar sermon I just got done preaching. No such thing, young man, interrupted Anton. Well, a great deal of our data has been supplied us by the cult. Our results contain none of the cult's mysticism. Facts are facts, and the cult's so-called mythology has certain facts. As I turn the page, finish my nose. Certain facts behind it. We've exposed them and ripped away their mystery. I assure you that the cult hates us now worse than you do. I don't hate you. I'm just trying to tell you that the public is an ugly humor. They're angry. Antoine twisted his mouth in derision. Let them be angry. Yes. But what about tomorrow? There will be no tomorrow. But if there is, say that there is, just to see what happens. That anger might take shape into something serious. After all, you know, business has taken a nosedive these last 2 months. Investors don't really believe the world is coming to an end, but just the same, they're being cagey with their money until it's all over. Johnny Public doesn't believe you either. But the new spring furniture might as well wait a few months, just to make sure. You see the point. Just as soon as this is all over, the business interests will be after your hide. They'll say that if crackpots, begging your pardon, can upset the country's prosperity any time they want simply by making some cockeyed prediction, it's up to the planet to prevent them. The sparks will fly, sir. The director regarded the columnist, and guys, I am trying to keep my face in total focus in the center of the frame, but it's very hard when I'm reading the book with one hand and holding my little stupid phone with the other. But I'm trying my best. So if you get dizzy, just turn off the picture, or close your eyes and just listen. Okay? If you like the story, that is. If you don't like the story, it's not my fault. Don't blame the messenger. The director regarded the columnist sternly. And just what were you proposing to do to help the situation? Well, grinned Theramon, I was proposing to take charge of the publicity. I can handle things so that only the ridiculous side will show. It'll be hard to stand, I admit, because I'd have to make you all out to be a bunch of gibbering idiots. But if I can get people laughing at you, they might forget to be angry. In return for that, all my publisher asks is an exclusive story. Benny nodded and burst out. Sir, the rest of us think he's right. These last 2 months, we've considered everything but the 1,000,000 to 1 chance that there is an error somewhere in our theory or in our calculations. We ought to take care of that too. There was a murmur of agreement from the men grouped about the table. Anton's expression became that of one who found his mouth full of something bitter and couldn't get rid of it. You may stay if you wish, then. You will kindly refrain, however, from hampering us in our duties in any way. You will also remember that I am in charge of all activities here, and in spite of your opinions, as expressed in your columns, I will expect full cooperation and full respect. His hands were behind his back, and his wrinkled face thrust forward determinedly as he spoke. Is that determinedly enough? He may have continued indefinitely, but for the intrusion of a new voice. Hello, hello, hello. It came in a high tenor. I'm not going to do a high tenor. And the plump cheeks of the newcomer expanded in a pleased smile. What's this morgue-like atmosphere about here? No one's losing his nerve, I hope. Anton stared in consternation and said peevishly, Now what the devil are you doing here, Siren? I thought you were going to stay behind in the hideout. Siren laughed and dropped his tubby figure into a chair. Hideout, he bellowed. The place bored me. I wanted to be here where things are getting hot. Don't you suppose I have my share of curiosity? I want to see these stars the cultists are forever speaking about. He rubbed his hands and added in a sobering tone, It's freezing outside. The wind's enough to hang icicles on your nose. Beta doesn't seem to give any heat at all, at the distance it is. Now, guys, I'm going to pause real quick here, just as a quick little note, okay? If you're not familiar with the story, and if you're, hearing it for the first time, you're obviously not. They just mentioned stars, okay? The cultists are always speaking about stars. So, if you didn't get the gist of it, they have like 6 or so suns, that are nearby the planet. Now imagine if somehow we existed in like a 6-sunned or starred solar system, where we always had light, like daylight, okay? Then imagine for the first time in your life, suddenly, if you've lived for like 60, 90, whatever years, you suddenly see darkness and stars. Thus the name of the book, Nightfall. Okay? I'm sorry if I spoiled it, okay? Should have put that in as a spoiler alert, but that's the gist of it, okay? So in case you're getting bored and you're like, what's the gist of the book? I just want to get to the gist of it. That's the gist of it, okay? So now we know. It's freezing outside. The wind's enough to hang icicles on your nose. Beta doesn't seem to give any heat at all at the distance it is. The white-haired director ground his teeth in sudden exasperation. Why do you go out of your way to do crazy things, Siren? What kind of good are you around here? What kind of good am I around there? Siren spread his palms in comical resignation. A psychologist isn't worth his salt in the hideout. They need men of action and strong, healthy women that can breed children. Me? I'm 100 pounds too heavy for a man of action, and I wouldn't be a success at breeding children. So why bother them with an extra mouth to feed? I feel better over here. Theramon spoke briskly. Just what is the hideout, sir? Siren seemed to see the columnist for the first time. He frowned and blew his ample cheeks out. And just who in Lagash are you, redhead? Anton compressed his lips and then muttered sullenly. That's Theramon 762, the newspaper fellow. I suppose you've heard of him? The columnist offered his hand as we turn the page. And of course, your Siren 501 of Cerro University. I've heard of you. Then he repeated, What is this hideout, sir? Well, said Siren, we've managed to convince a few people of the validity of our prophecy of, doom. To be spectacular about it, and those few have taken proper measures. They consist mainly of the immediate members of the families of the observatory staff, certain of the faculty of Sarah University, and a few outsiders. Altogether, they number about 300. About 3/4 are women and children. I see. They're supposed to hide where the darkness and the stars can't get at them. And then hold out when the rest of the world goes poof. If they can. It won't be easy. With all of mankind insane, with the great cities going up in flames, environment will not be conducive to survival. But they have food, water, shelter, and weapons. They've got more, said Anton. They've got all our records, except for what we will collect today. Those records will mean everything to the next cycle. And that's what must survive. The rest can go hang. Theremin whistled a long, low whistle and sat brooding for several minutes. The men about the table had brought out a multi-chessboard and started a 6-member game. Moves were made rapidly and in silence, all eyes bent in furious concentration on the board. Theremin watched them intently, and then rose and approached Anton, who sat apart in whispered conversation with Saren. Listen, he said. Let's go somewhere where we won't bother the rest of these fellows. I want to ask some questions. The aged astronomer frowned sourly at him, but Saren chirped up. Certainly, it will do me good to talk. It always does. Anton was telling me about your ideas concerning world reaction to a failure of the prediction, and I agree with you. I read your column pretty regularly. By the way, and as a general thing, I like your views. Please. Saren growled at Anton. Please, Saren, growled Anton. All right. We'll go into the next room. It has softer chairs anyway. There were softer chairs in the next room. There were also thick red curtains on the windows and a maroon carpet on the floor. With the brickly light of Beta pouring in, the general effect was one of dried blood. Theremin shuddered. Say, I'd give 10 credits for a decent dose of white light for just a second. I wish Gamma or Delta were in the sky. What are your questions? Asked Anton. Please remember that our time is limited. In a little over an hour and a quarter, we're going upstairs. And after that, there'll be no time to talk. Well, here it is. Theremin leaned back and folded his hands on his chest. Your people seem so all-fired serious about this that I'm beginning to believe you. Would you mind explaining what it is all about? Anton exploded. Do you mean to sit there and tell me that you've been bombarding us with ridicule without even finding out what we've been trying to say? The columnist grinned sheepishly. It's not that bad, sir. I've got the general idea. You say that there's going to be a worldwide darkness in a few hours, and that all mankind will go violently insane. What I want now is the science behind it. No, you don't. No, you don't, broke in Saren. If you ask Anton for that, supposing him to be in the mood to answer at all, he'll trot out pages of figures and volumes of graphs. You won't make head or tail of it. Now, if you were to ask me, I would give you the layman's standpoint. All right, I'll ask you. Then first I'd like a drink. He rubbed his hands and looked at Anton. Water, grunted Anton. Don't be silly. Don't you be silly. No alcohol today. It would be too easy to get my men drunk. I can't afford to tempt them. The psychologist grumbled wordlessly. He turned to Theramon, impaled him with his sharp eyes, and began, "You realize, of course, that the history of civilization on Lagash displays a cyclical character. But I mean cyclic." "I know," Theramon replied cautiously. That is the current archaeological theory. Has it been accepted as a fact? Just about. In this last century, it has been generally agreed upon. This cyclic character is, or rather, was. As I turn the page. One of the greatest mysteries. We've located series of civilizations, 9 of them definitely, an indication of others as well, all of which have reached heights comparable to our own, and all of which, without exception, were destroyed by fire at the very height of their culture, and no one could tell why. Oops, as I have gas. Sorry. All centers of culture were thoroughly gutted by fire, with nothing left behind to give a hint as to the cause. Theramon was following closely. Wasn't there a Stone Age too? Probably, but as yet practically nothing is known of it, except that men of that age were little more than rather intelligent apes. We can forget about that. I see. Go on. There have been explanations of these recurrent catastrophes, all of them more or less fantastic nature. Some say that there are periodic rains of fire, some that Lagash passes through a sun every so often, some even wilder things. But there is one theory, quite different from all of these, that has been handed down over a period of centuries. I know. You mean this myth of the stars that the cultists have in their Book of Revelations? Exactly, rejoined Saren with satisfaction. The cultists say that every 2,050 years, Lagash entered a huge cave, so that all the suns disappeared, and there came total darkness all over the world. And then, they say, things called stars appeared, which robbed men of their souls and left them unreasoning brutes, so that they destroyed the civilization they themselves had built up. Of course, they mix all this up with a lot of religious mystic notions, but that's the central idea. There was a short pause, in which Saren drew a long breath. And now we come to the theory of universal gravitation. He pronounced the phrase so that the capital letters sounded, and at that point Anton turned from the window, snorted loudly, and walked out of the room. The two stared after him, and Theramon said, "What's wrong?" "Nothing in particular," replied Saren. "Two of the men were due several hours ago and haven't shown up yet." Sorry. He's terrifically short-handed, of course, because all but the really essential men have gone to the hideout. You don't think the two deserted, do you? Who? Pharaoh and Yamat? Of course not. Still, if they're not back within the hour, things would be a little sticky. He got to his feet suddenly, and his eyes twinkled. Twinkle, twinkle. Anyway, as long as Anton is gone, Tiptoeing to the nearest window, he squatted, and from the low window box beneath withdrew a bottle of red liquid that gurgled suggestively when he shook it. "I thought Anton didn't know about this," he remarked, as he trotted back to the table. "Here. We've only got one glass, so as the guest, you can have it. I'll keep the bottle." And he filled the tiny cup with judicious care. Theramon rose to protest, but Sharon eyed him sternly. "Respect your elders, young man." The servant seated himself with a look of pain and anguish on his face. "Go ahead, then, you old villain." The psychologist Adam's apple wobbled as the bottle upended, and then, with a satisfied grunt and a smack of the lips, he began again. As I readjust my legs in my own water bottle. Sorry. "But what do you know about gravitation?" Nothing, except that it is a very recent development, not too well established, and that the math is so hard that only 12 men of Lagash are supposed to understand it. Pfft, nonsense. Baloney. I can give you all the essential math in a sentence. The law of universal gravitation states that there exists a cohesive force among all bodies of the universe, such that the amount of this force between any two given bodies is proportional to the product of their masses divided by the square of the distance between them. Is that all? That's enough. It took 400 years to develop it. Why that long? It sounded simple enough, the way you said it. Because great laws are not divined by flashes of inspiration, whatever you may think. It usually takes the combined work of a world full of scientists over a period of centuries. After Genovi 41 discovered that Lagash rotated about the sun Alpha, rather than vice versa. And that was 400 years ago. Astronomers have been working. As I turn the page again. The complex motions of the 6 suns were recorded and analyzed and unwoven. Theory after theory was advanced. And I'm just going to check the right, just make sure I got the right page. I'm sorry, guys. I hate to interrupt the whole thing, right? Sorry. Working, the complex motions of the 6 suns were recorded and analyzed and unwoven. That's why I'm having trouble. I don't like the sentence. It doesn't sound right. Theory after theory was advanced and checked and counter-checked and modified and abandoned and reviewed and converted to something else. It was the devil of a job. Theramon nodded thoughtfully and held out his glass for more liquor. Sharon grudgingly allowed a few ruby drops to leave the bottle. It was 20 years ago, he continued, after remoistening his own throat, that it was finally demonstrated that the law of universal gravitation accounted exactly for the orbital motions of the 6 suns. It was a great triumph. Sharon stood up and walked to the window, still clutching his bottle. And now we're getting to the point. The last decade, the motions of Lagash about Alpha were computed according to gravity, and it did not account for the orbit observed, not even when all perturbations due to the other suns were included. Either the law was invalid, or there was another, as yet unknown, factor involved. Theramon joined Saren at the window and gazed out past the wooded slopes where the spires of Cerro City gleamed bloodily on the horizon. The newsman felt the tension of uncertainty grow within him as he cast a short glance at Beta. It glowered redly at Zenith, dwarfed and evil. "Go ahead, sir," he said softly. Siren replied, Astronomers stumbled about for years each proposed theory more untenable than... One second. There is a blotted out letter than the one before. Until Anton had the inspiration of calling in the cult. The head of the cult, Sor 5, had access to certain data that simplified the problem considerably. Anton set to work on a new track. What if there was another non-luminous planetary body such as Lagash? If there were, it would shine only by reflected light. And if it were composed of bluish rock, as Lagash itself largely is, then in the redness of the sky, the eternal blaze of the suns would make it invisible, drown it out completely. Theramon whistled. What a screwy idea. You think that's screwy? Listen to this. Suppose this body rotated about Lagash at such a distance and in such an orbit and had such a mass that its attraction exactly accounted for the deviations of Lagash's orbit from theory. Do you know what would happen? The columnist shook his head. Well, sometimes this body would get in the way of a sun. And Siren emptied what remained in the bottle at a draught. And it does, I suppose, said Theramon flatly. Yes. But only one sun lies in its plane of revolutions. He jerked a thumb at the shrunken sun above, Beta. And it has been shown that the eclipse will occur only when the arrangements of the suns is such that Beta is alone in its hemisphere and at a maximum distance, at which time the moon is invariably at minimum distance. The eclipse that results, with the moon 7 times the apparent diameter of Beta, covers all of Lagash and lasts well over half a day, so that no spot on the planet escapes the effect. That eclipse comes once every 2,049 years. Theramon's face was drawn into an expressionless mask. And that's my story. The psychologist nodded. Well, that's all of it. First, the eclipse, which will start in 3/4 of an hour. Then, universal darkness. And maybe these mysterious stars. Then madness. And the end of the cycle. He brooded. We had 2 months leeway. We, at the observatory. And that wasn't enough time to persuade Lagash of the danger. 2 centuries might not have been enough. But our records are at the hideout. And today we photograph the eclipse. The next cycle will start off with the truth. And when the next eclipse comes, mankind will at last be ready for it. Come to think of it, that's part of your story too. A thin wind ruffled the curtains at the window as Thurman opened it and leaned out. It played coldly with his hair as he stared at the crimson sunlight. As he stared at the crimson sunlight on his hand. Then he turned in sudden rebellion. What is there in darkness to drive me mad? Sharon smiled to himself as he spun the empty liquor bottle with abstracted motions of his hand. Have you ever experienced darkness, young man? The newsman leaned against the wall and considered. No, I can't say I have. But I know what it is. Just, he made vague motions with his fingers and then brightened. Just no light? Like in caves? Have you ever been in a cave? In a cave? Of course not. I thought not. I tried last week, just to see. But I got out in a hurry. I went in until the mouth of the cave was just visible as a blur of light, with black everywhere else. I never thought a person my weight could run that fast. Thurman's lips curled. Well, if it comes to that, I guess. I wouldn't have run if I had been there. The psychologist studied the young man with an annoyed frown. My, don't you talk big. I dare you to draw the curtain. Thurman looked his surprise and said, What for? If we had 4 or 5 suns out there, we might want to cut the light down for a bit of comfort. But now we haven't enough light as it is. That's the point. Just draw the curtain. Then come here and sit down. All right. Thurman reached for the tasseled string and jerked. The red curtain slid across the wide window, the brass rings hissing their way along the crossbar, and a dusk-red shadow clamped down on the room. Thurman's footsteps sounded hollowly in this silence as he made his way to the table, and then they stopped halfway. I can't see you, sir, he whispered. Feel your way, ordered Sharon in a strained voice. But I can't see you, sir. The newsman was breathing harshly. I can't see anything. What did you expect? Came the grim reply. Come here and sit down. The footsteps sounded again, waveringly, approaching slowly. There was the sound of someone fumbling with the chair. Thurman's voice came thinly. Here I am. I feel all right. You like it, do you? No. It's pretty awful. The walls seem to be... He paused. They seem to be closing in on me. I keep wanting to push them away, but I'm not going mad. In fact, the feeling isn't as bad as it was. All right. Draw the curtain back again. There were cautious footsteps through the dark, the rustle of Thurman's body against the curtain as he felt for the tassel, and then the triumphant whoosh of the curtain slithering back. Red light flooded the room, and with a cry of joy, Thurman looked up at the sun. Sharon wiped the moistness off his forehead with the back of a hand and said shakily, and that was just a dark room. It can be stood, said Thurman lightly. Yes, a dark room can be. But where were you? At the Jongler Centennial Expedition 2 years ago? No. It so happens I never got around to it. 6,000 miles was just a bit too much to travel, even for the exposition. Well, I was there. You remember hearing about the tunnel of mystery that broke all records in the amusement area? For the first month or so, anyway? Yes, wasn't there some fuss about it? Very little. It was hushed up. You see, that tunnel of mystery was just a mile-long tunnel with no lights. You got into a little open car and jolted along through darkness for 15 minutes. It was very popular. Well, it lasted. Popular? Certainly. There's a fascination in being frightened when it's part of the game. A baby is born with 3 instinctive fears: of loud noises, of falling, and of the absence of light. That's why it's considered so funny to jump at someone and shout, "Boo!" That's why it's such fun to ride a roller coaster. And that's why the tunnel of mystery started cleaning up. People came out of that darkness, shaking, breathless, half dead with fear. But they kept on paying to get in. Wait a minute, I remember now. Some people came out dead, didn't they? There were rumors of it after it shut down. The psychologist snorted. Bah. 2 or 3 died. That was nothing. They paid off the families of the dead ones and argued the Jungler City Council into forgetting it. After all, they said if people with weak hearts want to go through the tunnel, it was at their own risk. And beside, it wouldn't happen again. So they put a doctor in the front office and had every customer go through a physical examination before getting into the car. That actually boosted sale tickets then. Well then, but you see, there was something else. People sometimes came out in perfect order, except that they refused to go into buildings, any buildings, including palaces, mansions, apartment houses, tenements, cottages, huts, shacks, lean-tos, and tents. Theremin looked shocked. You mean they refused to come out out of the open? Where'd they sleep? I probably heard that wrong, didn't I? I'm going to pause and I'll be right back. Just going to make sure. Okay. There we go. I'll just recap a couple parts of the sentence that I think I flubbed up on. But you see, there was something else. People sometimes came out in perfect order, except that they refused to go into buildings, any buildings. Theremin looked shocked. You mean they refused to come out of the open? Where'd they sleep? In the open. They should have forced them inside. Oh, they did. They did. Whereupon these people went into violent hysterics and did their best to bat their brains out against the nearest wall. Once you got them inside, you couldn't keep them there without a straitjacket and a shot of morphine. They must have been crazy. Which is exactly what they were. 1 person out of every 10 who went into that tunnel came out that way. They called in their psychologists, and we did the only thing possible. We closed down the exhibit. He spread his hands. What was the matter with those people? Asked Theremin finally. Essentially the same thing that was the matter with you when you thought that the walls of the room were crushing in on you in the dark. There's a psychological term for man's instinctive fear of the absence of light. We call it claustrophobia, because the lack of light is always tied up with enclosed places, so that fear of one is a fear of the other, you see. And those people of the tunnel consisted of those unfortunates whose mentality did not quite possess the resiliency to overcome the claustrophobia that overtook them in the darkness. 15 minutes without light is a long time. You only had 2 or 3 minutes, and I believe you were fairly upset. I'll just recheck the time here. Oh, that's perfect. Sorry, guys, one moment. The people of the tunnel had what is called a claustrophobic fixation. Their latent fear of darkness and enclosed places had crystallized and became active. And as far as we can tell, permanent. That's what 15 minutes in the dark will do. There was a long silence, and Theramon's forehead wrinkled slowly into a frown. I don't believe it's that bad. One moment. Pause. Sorry about that. Moving on. There was a long silence, and Theramon's forehead wrinkled slowly into a frown. I don't believe it's that bad. You mean you don't want to believe? Snapped Sharon. You're afraid to believe. Look out the window. Theramon did so, and the psychologist continued without pausing. Imagine darkness everywhere. No light. As far as you can see. The houses, the trees, the fields, the earth, the sky, black. And stars, thrown in, for all I know, whatever they are. Can you conceive it? Yes, I can, declared Theramon. And Sharon slammed his fist down upon the table in sudden passion. You lie! You can't conceive that. Your brain wasn't built for the conception any more than it was built for the conception of infinity or eternity. You can only talk about it. A fraction of the reality upsets you, and when the real thing comes, your brain is going to be presented with the phenomenon outside its limits of comprehension. You will go mad. Completely and permanently. There was no question of it. He added sadly, and another couple of millenniums of painful struggle comes to nothing. Tomorrow, there won't be a city standing unharmed in all Lagash. Theramon recovered part of his mental equilibrium. That doesn't follow. I still don't see that I can go loony just because there isn't a sun in the sky. But even if I did and everyone else did, how does that harm the cities? Are we gonna blow them down? But Sharon was angry too. If you were in darkness, what would you want more than anything else? What would it be that every instinct would call for? Light, damn you. Light. Well, and how would you get light? I don't know, said Theramon flatly. What's the only way to get light? Sort of the sun. How should I know? They were standing face to face and nose to nose. Sharon said, You burn something, mister. Ever see a forest fire? Ever go camping and cook a stew over a wood fire? As I turn the page. Heat isn't the only thing burning wood gives off, you know. It gives off light, and people know that. And when it's dark, they want light, and they're going to get it. So they burn. Oopsie, sorry. So they burn wood. So they burn whatever they can get. They've got to have light. They've got to burn something, and wood isn't handy, so they'll burn whatever is nearest. They have their light, and every center of habitation goes up in flames. Eyes held each other, as though the whole matter were a personal affair of respective willpowers. And then Theramon broke away wordlessly. His breathing was harsh and ragged, and he scarcely noted the sudden hubbub that came from the adjoining room behind the closed door. Sharon spoke, and it was with an effort that he made it sound matter of fact. I think I heard Yamat's voice. He and Pharaoh are probably back. Let's go in and see what kept them. Might as well, muttered Theramon. He drew a long breath and seemed to shake himself. The tension was broken. And guys, you know my the space issue I have on my phone. You probably don't know this offhand, okay? Every time I do a video, I try to keep it under around an hour, 10 minutes, okay? I don't know if you can see the little bubble here that I'm moving around with my finger, the recorder, the screen recorder. That's weird. Thankfully it keeps track of the time for me. And in my experience, I can record for about 1:10 before my phone just goes poof, and that's it, I'm out of space. The recording stops automatically, okay? And we're at 1:02 right now. And let me just quickly go over how many pages we have left to go through. Oopsie. There it is. Oopsie. One second. $22. 22, and we made it through about 15. So, yeah. So I was hoping this could be a one-part and only one-part video, but after looking at the amount of pages the story was, I'm like, oh, even if I go through a page every 3 minutes, this is going to be well over an hour, so thank you for watching part 1 of Justin Pontarelli reads Isaac Asimov's Nightfall. Hope you're enjoying the story so far, like I had the first time when I read it. I'm still enjoying it. I love the dialogue. I love how heated the conversations get. I love trying to imagine the 6 suns and somehow the little planets going woo, 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 and somehow this other body comes along and just blots everything else out. Just trying to imagine that kind of system and what it would look like, you know. For me, science fiction is like, wow, it's so cool. Trying to imagine what that might be like, you know. It's great stuff. I always love stars, astronomy, you know. Science fiction, Star Trek, Star Wars, all cool. You know. First time reading that story, I was like, wow, this guy, man, pretty good stuff. Pretty good stuff. So guys, if you like this, you want me to do more of these, let me know and I can read through pretty much every story in this book. There's some classics in here, including Flowers for Algernon. So if you don't mind my crazy hectic style of narration, let me know and we'll do more. Okay, I think it might be a fun break or change of pace from things like my preaching and even interstellar pilot videos. Okay, something else I can add to my repertoire, and we can do that kind of stuff too. Okay, so I'm gonna finish the story, don't you worry. I'm gonna try to finish it all today, hoping my upload time isn't too horribly slow. Okay, so this is part 1. So stand by for part 2 later today after a couple hours, okay? It's going to be a couple hours though, at least, minimum. So stand by. As always, thank you for watching. And remember, questions, comments, and constructive criticism down below. Okay? And as always, remember, Virus 2020, wash your hands. Until next time, guys. See ya.